So today, my original goal was to give a primer on feature management API in .NET Core, but I was repeatedly reminded that the .NET Core name has kind of gone to the wayside, and it's now .NET 5 and .NET 6. My original code samples used to be in .NET Core 3, but I have since upgraded them to 6. So we now have an upgraded talk. Uh, a little bit about this topic. I want to kind of use this session to help you better understand the power of feature management APIs. And I will do that with, talking about feature flags in general, use cases, some best practices, and some of the code samples. So the agenda is I'll be flying through the basics and some strategies on feature flags. I will be talking about feature management, which is the hero of the show. And then I'll do some demos or at least walk through the code, depending on how much time I have. And then we will quickly touch on some lessons learned from when I used feature flags. So this is a little bit about myself. I'm a senior consultant at Microsoft, and that's my Twitter handle and my LinkedIn. If everything that's in this talk is on my GitHub repo, so you can actually go to this GitHub repo, and there is a source directory in there, and that has .NET 6 now. So you should be able to follow the code samples in there. And all this content is also listed in that GitHub repo. With that, let's dive into feature flags. What are feature flags in software? A flag is kind of a Boolean. It can be, obviously true or false. A feature is a chunk of functionality that delivers some value. Thus, a feature flag is basically an if statement that surrounds some functionality. Feature flags, in reality, they are more complicated than a simple if loop, but if you dig down to the bottom, that's what it is. It's a way to change your software's functionality without changing and redeploying your code. So if you look at this, feature flags are basically if statements. It's a decision point in the behavior of your application, and it changes the way your application behaves. So what a feature flag does is it will either trigger or hide hidden code and hidden behaviors. And you can do this without shipping new versions of your software. Isn't that just fantastic? In ancient ASP.NET web app days, which would be kind of my era when dinosaurs roamed the surface of the earth, we used to put feature flags in the web.config files and change them occasionally. But now it's gotten far better. And that's what I want to talk about today. In this code sample, just want to touch on a few points. The enable feature is called the toggle configuration, and it determines if we should even use the feature flag. So you can actually turn a feature flag on or off. And then within the feature flag, there is something called a toggle router. In this case, it's the trial period feature, and that is a method that calculates if, when the feature flag is enabled, if the certain conditions are triggered or not. And finally, you have the start date and the number of days. These are called a toggle context, which means these are conditions under which the feature flag is triggered. So it's important to kind of know these, because when people think of feature flags, you think of a simple Boolean, right? But obviously it has multiple parts on here. It has a toggle configuration, which determines if we should even use it. It has a toggle router, which actually does the calculations, and then it has a set of conditions that trigger it. So just keep in mind that it's more complicated than a simple if loop. We also need to quickly touch on deployments and releases. To the left are deployments, and to the right on your screen are releases. A deployment is basically your team's process of pushing the new version of your code to production. Deployments can be low risk because even when the code fails, if you have not exposed it to the customer, it has low impact. So it's a minimal impact. It should ideally have minimal impact on your customer, and ideally, deployment should be the decision of a software team. Uh, Speaking of releases, a release, when we say new feature is released, this means that production traffic is hitting the code for this new feature. When production traffic hits the new code, it opens it up to all kinds of risks. So this risk could be something like, sorry, did I change? This risk could be something like an outage, crash, bug, and all of these are exposed to customers. As a result, it's high impact and high risk. So the decision to release new features could involve various stakeholders, and these stakeholders could be outside of your regular software team. So just to sum up, deployments should be the decision of the software team, and releases can include various stakeholders. And the way we control or separate deployments from releases is using feature flags. And I'll quickly touch on some feature flag strategies before I dive into code. So the first strategy is a toggle or kill switch. This is a simple on-off button. It's an all or nothing strategy. You can basically turn a feature on and off by redirecting code flow in production. And you can quickly turn off a feature if it's performing poorly. And these are some of the types of toggle switches that you'll probably see in real life. And it gives you the ability to turn it off if something goes wrong. You may hear about the A/B testing strategy. A/B testing strategy is similar to a toggle, but it's not all or nothing. It's also known as split testing. So it's the process where you show two different variants of the same feature at the same time to different participants. And then you compare which variant drives more conversions. The variant that gives higher conversions is often the winning one. Although that's not always the case, but that's generally the case. You may have heard of canary releases. This comes from the story of a canary in a coal mine. So the story is that when the canary stops singing, that means there's trouble. Similarly, in software, we target a small subsection of users, aka the canary group. If we are happy with how it's performing, we start to routing those features to more users. The migrate phase to rollout could last for weeks. And doing a phased rollout helps us with things like bugs, performance, functionality. We can fix it, roll back easily because it's only a small subsection of users that initially get exposed to the early code. The downside of a canary release is that you may have to manage multiple versions depending on how complex your code base is. Ring release, again, we'll do some contrived examples of these today in our code, but I want to kind of touch base on this one. This was a term coined by Microsoft, I believe. It's a method to gradually expose features to different groups of users with different risk profiles. You start with a small group of low-risk users, like internal developers, right? That would be a good group to early release the features to. And then you expand through larger high-risk population, like internal employees, and then you take it out to the public. It goes something like this. You have a canary group, You have insiders, early adopters, and then all. That's the general workflow. It could be more, and often it is more complex. Here we get the concept of blast radius. This helps us identify problems early and limits the blast radius by withholding it to a small group. If something goes wrong, then you know that it was just a small set of people that were impacted, and you can stop the rollout, fix it, and then move forward. Again, the downside to this is you may have to maintain multiple versions, often one for each ring or more. And finally, the one strategy I want to talk about, but you'll probably that I will not be doing any code about, but you'll probably see in real life is blue-green. This is widely used by many software teams. This is an infrastructure feature flag approach. So blue is the current set of current software, and green is the new software. So you deploy to green, and then you switch over from blue to green. So that's a very infrastructure-based rollout and often involves a load balancer to redirect production traffic. And if something goes wrong, you get to roll back. And again, you can incorporate feature flags within the software that's been rolled out, but this is more at an infrastructure level. So that brings us to the main hero of the story, which is feature management. Feature management provides comprehensive flag support in .NET. So the feature management libraries are built on top of the .NET configuration system. This is often things you see like app settings.json and so on. So you have local JSON file support for feature flags, and your configuration values can change, and the feature flags can be consistent across entire requests. You can toggle features on and off through a declarative configuration file, and you can dynamically evaluate the state of the feature based on the server to the call. With feature management, you also get API extensions for ASP.NET and MVC framework, like routing, filters, and action attributes. We will touch on some of those in our code. Feature flags in .NET consist of a name and a feature filter. The feature filters are scenarios for enabling and disabling flags. Again, we'll walk through that in an example today. And the downside of the config file-based approach, I do want to point this out, is that it's kind of makes the app standalone. So for instance, if you deploy out a service with a config file and you want to flip a toggle, you may have to do a redeployment of the config file. So it's good in certain scenarios, but these days we often work with distributed systems, microservices, and so on. So to handle that, we need to use a centralized place to manage feature flags. Azure App Configuration, which again we'll be talking about today, provides a centralized location for managing application settings and feature flags. Using app config, you can centrally store your feature flags, and you can control them often with a UI or with code because it's Azure PaaS. The feature flags are automatically updated. You do not have to redeploy your application. And the .NET SDK actually automatically pulls the feature flag state by default every 30 seconds. And obviously, because it's Azure PaaS, you have some of these additional advantages, like it's fully managed service. You get enhanced security through Azure managed identities. It's infrastructure as code friendly, like you can use ARM templates, Terraform, whatever it is, and you get like integration with multiple SDKs. With that, I'll jump into the demo. So the first one I want to talk about today is a simple feature flag. So let's get to a basic feature flag, and hopefully this is big enough. Maybe I'll increase the font size a little. So this is a simple application, right? So what I would like to do is, I would like to uh, enable feature flags for this application. So what I'd start with doing is, I pull the application configuration. So by default, when you create a .NET MVC application, you get you get the builder, and using the builder, I pull the configuration, and then uh, using the configuration, I actually check a section of the configuration. Now, the default configuration includes app-settings.json, and I have added a feature flag to this. And if you look at it, it's this section where it says feature management, and I set the toggle to true. So over here, when I pull in the configuration, I'm telling it to look at the feature management section, and then I'm saying that I want to add the feature management service, and that is it. Actually, you'd have to obviously include the feature management library, which you can see is uh, installed in the application settings. By the way, this is a .NET 6 MVC application. So at this point, it's enabled for feature flags. So all I did was I added the feature management library, and I pointed it to the app settings. So when I run this application, the other thing I do is in the controller, I'm simply injecting the feature management, and then I am using that to evaluate the toggle, which was in the app settings.json. So it should come back true. So when I run this in debug mode, and it hits this, it should evaluate to true. So there it goes, it evaluates to true. In case you couldn't see it, again, true. And if I switch it back to false and rerun it, it will switch to false. So while that's running, I want to jump to a more complicated example, one that you might actually find interesting. So there it goes, it's to false. So that's a contrived example of a simple feature flag. But I want to do something more interesting, right? I mean, this is great. I mean, I can toggle it on and off from web config, but I feel like these days it's all about things like e-commerce and other things. So, if I'm deploying applications for e-commerce, they could include a web app, they could include mobile app, API services, and so on. So, as a result of that, instead of using a local configuration, what I'm doing is I actually have a Azure app config instance configured, and as you can see, it's an Azure app config, and that is the endpoint for that. And I would have to, in order to connect to this, I need the connection string, which can be gotten from the access keys. I can copy that to my clipboard, and for my app, I can provision that using .NET user secret set. So I've already done that, and in this application, what I'm doing is I'm using I'm connecting to the secrets, and it would be like app secrets colon Azure app connection string. So that would be how I stored it in there. So that's what I would use to connect. But in order to, instead of using the app settings.json, I would like to actually pick up my feature flag from Azure app configuration. So I have to add a few more things to my code from the previous example. So as you can see, in the previous code, I added Azure add feature management, and that is not going to be enough. So this feature management, I actually have to specify the type. So if I go back and look at the type, you can see that I configured a feature setting that is a holiday sale time window. And you can see that this is enabled. So the toggle configuration is enabled. And I'm using it's of type time window. So I'm actually specifying a time window. And I'm saying it needs to be from November 1st to December 31st. So that's when I want to do my holiday sales, right? So now what should happen is if I run my code and connect to this, it should evaluate to true because both my feature flag is enabled and it's within the time window. But in order to connect to that, I have to add feature management service to the application, and then I have to specify the type of feature filter I'm using. In this case, it's a time window filter. And then I am adding the Azure app configuration service to this. Again, in order to enable those, I have to make sure that I'm installing the right libraries. And these are some of the libraries that are needed. So you would need, obviously, Microsoft Feature Management. In order for it to use some advanced features of ASP.NET Core, you need that. And this is obviously still using some older libraries. I also need the Azure app configuration. I need this library, and then I need app configuration.ASP.NET Core in order to hook that up to our MVC application. So with that, I'm adding the Azure app configuration service, and then I'm configuring it. In order to configure it, I am using the connection string that I got from the Azure app config. And then I am enabling feature flags. This means that my application's feature flags are now connected to the Azure app config feature management. And then I'm doing one more thing. I'm configuring refresh, which means that I'm saying that for my holiday sale time window, I would like for it to refresh every 10 seconds. So is that it? No, because I would like to do a few more things, obviously. So as you can see, this is our previous example. And in the previous example, we simply looked at it in the code. But now I want to look at it in the view itself. So to inject it into the view, what I would have to do is I would have, and to use it in all the views, I'd have to add a tag helper. So this uses I'd have to add this feature management.ASP.NET Core tag helper within the view. And then when I actually go to my view pages, I can I can hide content of the view pages or show them depending on the feature flag. So for that, I use the feature tag and I enclose things within the feature tag. So you can see that for my holiday sale time window, I'm displaying a link and showing a banner. But what happens when the feature flag is not set? I'm also handling that case using negate equal to true. So let's go ahead and run this app. So as you can see, it's showing the holiday sale banner. And when I click on this, it's going to a page with some details again. So what I'm going to do is I will come in here. I can do one or two things, right? I can disable the feature flag, or I can change the time window for it not to be enabled. So let's change the time window because disabling the feature flag sounds kind of easy. So once I do this, it says feature flag updated. I can come in here and it's actually, if you look at what it did, it went to the negate equal to true coming soon.jpg. So switch to that banner. But wait, there's more. If you go and look at the actual detail page, now it's showing a 404 not wanted. How did I do that? I used something called a feature gate. Okay, I see I have 8 minutes left. I can wrap this up soon. So I use a feature. I use a feature of this called FeatureGate, and the FeatureGate basically uses the name of the flag, and when the flag is disabled, it returns a 404. So that's another way of doing feature flags, where somewhat uh, real life examples on how you can use that. I want to touch on a final uh, example on feature flags, and for that, I'll switch to my next section of code. And in this example, what I'm doing is I am actually, and I'm creating a bunch of users and assigning them to groups. And if you look at my app settings.json, what it says is that I have this feature called Git Magic Fellow Pilot, and it's using a Microsoft targeting type. So I'm basically targeting users, and I'm targeting either these users, which is the user names. So if user with these IDs come up, it's going to allow them access to that feature. But also groups, like if you belong in ring 0, I can giving you 100% access, but ring 1, only 20% of the users get access. So let me go ahead and run this code. Again, all of these are available in the code samples. I'm a little bit out of time, so I would like to just run this one. Oh, by the way, this uses the minimal APIs, and it's actually returning an API call and refreshing live. So you can see that when you zoom in here, you can see that I have access because it was specified in the file, but other users, if you belong to ring 0, it's mostly true. Ring 1, it's either true or false. So again, that's another way to use feature flags. So let me go ahead and stop with this. So and I'm going to finish off my slides and take questions. So some things I want to stress about feature flags. These are technical debts. Keep reviewing them. Do not daisy chain feature flags because it can lead to unpredictable consequences. You can use feature flags with change advisory boards, but you have to follow a process. Again, if you go to my Git repo, I have everything, a lot of good information on that about this. Always measure, when you're using feature flags, measure your behavior pre and post enabling the feature flag. Do not build your own feature flag frameworks. Use existing one like FeatureManagement API. And also, generally, the recommendation is no long-lived branches. And with that, I am going to stop sharing, and I'll take questions.
Hey,
Hey,
Santosh, how you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. So give me 1 second. I'm trying to get used to the setup here, and I will share my questions here. So we have about 3 questions that have been asked, and let me just refresh the posts in here. So actually, the first one that I enjoy is it's from Sean Whitesell, which you and I both know, and he's actually giving you a huge kudos. He says, "I have a lot of respect for Santosh. He spoke at the Codepalooza from a hotel room because his internet line got cut. He made sure not to miss a speaking time."
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate that.
Well, like I said, and this is one thing I love about the community aspect of this session is that we are all volunteering our time, right, to and our passion to share this content. So I just kind of wanted to give a huge shout out to you, Santosh, for doing that. And now here's an actual question for the feature flags. Mikhail from Twitter is asking, will feature flags work in WAF/SAML application?
So these are, you can run feature flags. I've run feature flags from console applications, right? So, yeah, you can. you just have to use the library. And my understanding is I've never used it in XAML. I am pretty sure, like if I spend some time, I can get it working with the XAML applications.
Right.
Just use the Microsoft feature management library.
Yeah, and obviously a feature flag, it's not it shouldn't be specific to any type of technology. Like you said, a console app should just be work because it's
Right.
just like, is this thing on or is it off? Right.
Right, right. And yeah, I guess I was coming at it more from I was taking the question to mean that whether Microsoft feature management library would
Oh, got
work.
it. Got
So,
it. Yep.
so yes, yes, I think it will work.
Perfect. And here's another one. Another question from Wenham and from Twitter. He wants to know, he or she wants to know, how would you use feature flag management slash Azure app config to enable features for specific tenants in a multi-tenant application?
Okay, that's an interesting question. In a multi-tenant application, I'm not sure how the tenant of an application necessarily impacts
So
how,
it could
yeah.
be like, hey, I have tenant A and tenant B. For tenant B, and this is the way I'm reading the question, I will
Mhm,
have features A, B, and Q turned on. For tenant
mhm.
A, I will have X, Y, and R turned on, right?
Okay, okay.
From that situation.
Great. Yeah, great explanation, actually. Yeah, thanks. That helps me understand that. So what I would do is I would look at the targeting example that I did my final demo on.
Mhm.
So the targeting example is a great one. Like, that in that particular example, I used a user and a group, right? So basically what this means is that you can use a combination of an ID and some sort of a group, and this group could be a tenant, it could be an AD group. You can
Right.
basically, seems like you just have to jerry rig your code to work with the right set of parameters. So yeah, I think you can do it. It would be an interesting project that
Sure.
I'd be if, if he wants to get in touch with me, I'd be willing to look at that.
Great. That'd be awesome. Like in the questions out on Twitter. So go ahead and check that out and you can kind of start a conversation with them out there. Well, we're right on time. So Santosh, again, thank you so much for taking the time to present.